Welcome to another episode of the Momentum Interview Series. I'm Mo, and today I'm speaking to Chris de Vylder, Chief Revenue Officer at Sentry.io, the error and performance monitoring platform. Chris, thanks so much for making the time to be with us today. Where does this episode find you?
I'm actually in the Bay Area, so I am just south of San Francisco in Palo Alto.
Sweet. So let's jump right into it. What are the essential ingredients of your go-to-market RevOps playbook?
There's a couple of things for us that are kind of specific to how we go to market with Sentry, right? One, the company was based on an open source product. So our founder created a solution to a problem that he was facing himself, open sourced it, and then saw that there was a ton of traction around it. So at this point, we have about 1 million developers that are using our solution as an open source solution. In parallel, we are a classic product-led growth company. So it's a fashionable term these days, but what we've done is taken that open source product and we started hosting it ourselves as a SaaS offering. And that is available for people to start using it for free and to then swipe their credit card when they see value and essentially sign up self-service. And so that's a core component of our business, that foundation of both the open source model and the self-serve user community. That's the one that we essentially mine to go figure out where are the big companies in there, where are there signals that we get traction with those companies, and then how do we build on that with the different sales playbooks that we have. So one sales playbook is an open source migration playbook. So customers who are hosting our product themselves, we essentially engage with them. We kind of let them know what the benefits are of moving to a SaaS offering. And that's become a key source of opportunities for us. And then others are obviously people who use our product self-serve, are using it on one team within their organization. And our playbook there from a sales perspective is to take that initial island and figure out what other islands, development teams there are in the company, and to then essentially help them standardize on Sentry as their error and performance tracking solution.
I've seen a few other companies take this exact same route of open sourcing their core product and then having sort of like a premium upgraded version. Do you think this is a trend that a lot of companies are going to take, especially in the dev tool space?
I think so. Honestly, like if you look at kind of the space that we are in specifically, there are a number of vendors that have proprietary technology, proprietary agents that you need to install, etc. And one of the things that we see more and more is that a number of our customers are kind of tired of that approach and appreciate the fact that we have an ability to, or that they have an ability, whether they use that or not, to go back to an open source solution if they wanted to. It in essence gives them a sense of freedom, and the fact that they are not locked into a specific vendor is a thing that they appreciate. And so we do see that, and we see, for example, that people are using us in conjunction with other open source based tools like Grafana, etc., to build their observability stack that way. So I do think it's a trend, and I do think we will see that continue. Whether that's a strategy you can adopt, that's a different story. Like, it's very hard to take a closed source solution and then go and open source it. So it's probably something that you have to do from the beginning and then build on that. So.
Coming back to Sentry, what's the most challenging thing about doing sales in the error and performance monitoring space?
It's a little bit of an evangelical sale in some way. Like, one of the things that we do is kind of, in alignment with like the broader DevOps movement, where everything is shifting to the developer. We're shifting kind of accountability for, I would say, the user experience of the application back to the developer. So what we try to do is, in essence, when a user experiences a problem in the software, to bring the context and all the way down to the actual line of code and the owner of that code back to the developer so they can address it as soon as possible. And that goes a little bit against kind of the traditional ways that people are watching their performance of their applications. They really look at it as, is my application up or down? Not in a very granular way. And as a consequence, or at least as you see, some of that infrastructure up and down is really being moderated by a lot of the cloud vendors these days. So the systems are essentially modulating themselves and scaling up and down as there is more user demand. But to really understand what is going on with your end user, you need to go look at it at a more granular level. And that's essentially what we offer. And that is essentially to look at what is an individual user experiencing, what are the problems they have when they use an application or a platform or a website, whatever it might be, a gaming console, and to bring these problems back as fast as possible to the developer so they can address them. So it's a little bit of a culture shift in the way people think about observability, for example.
And what's one thing, during that sales process that makes the deals progress faster?
For us, one of the things that works very well is clear and open communication with the customer. And so I was not used to this before I joined Sentry, but we are using Slack very extensively to communicate with our customers. And so as soon as we have an opportunity, we in essence open up a Slack channel with the customer, and that becomes our way to very rapidly engage when they have questions, right? So typically we go through a proof of value with our customers. So they set up a system, either their own self-serve instance that they already have, and then we move in more and more of their projects so they can truly see how it operates at scale. During that process, there is a lot of questions about technical aspects of the product, licensing questions, security questions, etc. So we use Slack to communicate openly with our customers about all of these topics. That's kind of one element. We can also bring in all the different people that need to be involved in this, whether that's solution engineers or security teams internally at Sentry. They all get put in that Slack channel so they can address the questions of the customer as fast as possible. And then in parallel, I mean, we're talking about momentum here. We do the same. We have a parallel internal channel to discuss the opportunity, where the sales team, the broader sales team, engages with each other to really make sure that all the issues that we encounter in the deal, or all the things that we need to progress upon, that they are openly discussed and that people are all in one place to move it forward. And that's worked very well for us.
It's almost a given, wouldn't you say, that open communication is baked into the idea of working with people who are deploying open source products?
I think the benefits of something like Slack is that it's like everybody is there. It is constantly on your desktop as well. It's not something that's kind of happening in a parallel universe, which is where traditional sales used to happen, right? We just are all operating real time. And it's interesting, in some cases, customers discuss internal issues very openly in these Slack channels. So it kind of creates, I would say, an element of increased trust that they are able to bring out some of these challenges more openly or more quickly.
And have you seen any other challenges, apart from the usual time zone ones, but have you noticed any other challenges that come from doing sales on a global level?
For us, because we are still, and that will change very soon, we're still running all of our sales activities out of North America, and that we're going to change that this year. So we are expanding to Europe. Obviously, language barriers are a big one still, right? Like, we are big in gaming. We are big in kind of the marketplace applications, delivery applications, anything where there's tons of users and where the applications are extremely competitive so that you have to keep evolving rapidly. A lot of these opportunities are, for example, in Asia, right? In Japan, Korea, we see lots of gaming applications, lots of delivery applications, lots of kind of these marketplace apps. And obviously, when we want to engage with them, language is a big barrier beyond time zone. We don't have people that speak these languages necessarily on staff today. And so as a consequence, we are finding ourselves kind of more, that's more a traditional thing. As we scale the company, that will get better. But today, that is definitely for us an impediment in terms of reaching some of these customers.
Let's talk about churn a little bit here. If sales teams only did one thing to prevent churn, what would that be?
It's like any relationship, right? So in any relationship, it all comes down to expectations. And how do you set these expectations? Do you understand the expectations of the customer? And then do you manage to those expectations? And my sense is that if you do that well, and if you're very clear and transparent upfront about what is going to be done and what's not going to be done, and as a company, like and Sentry, we pride ourselves on making sure that we figure out what these things are and that we follow up closely with the customer to ensure that we meet those needs. If you do that, then I think churn is a non-issue. And where we see, or where I've seen it in the past, where things fail is, and I would say in product-led, that is a possibility, where customers start using your product, they grow with your product, you're not in touch with them because they've grown organically and self-serve with you, and sometimes they spend 6 figures with you. I mean, it was the case. It's the case here. It was the case at Atlassian, where we saw larger customers adopt products at scale, and there was no, or not necessarily, a direct relationship that was established, as a consequence of the self-serve motions, right? So there it takes a conscious effort to then go and engage with these customers and ensure that they get out of the product what they need to get out of it, so that obviously they don't churn at that point. So in PLG there is a little bit of an incremental challenge as some of these companies grow organically and grow so big, which generally is a sign of success. So therefore churn likely is small, but still, as you grow bigger in these accounts, there are other people that have concerns about it, right? Security is an obvious one. Like if something grows organically and the internal security teams in those larger companies haven't signed off on things or haven't looked at certain aspects of the product, there is a risk that some of that starts to disrupt your relationship. And so making proactive efforts to engage with those customers and really figure out like how do we ensure that nothing goes off the rails is a key aspect of running a PLG go-to-market strategy.
And speaking of scaling, so obviously scaling an enterprise sales team in and of itself is extremely complex. How would you approach scaling an enterprise sales team? What's your North Star around that process?
Yeah, so we take a fairly scientific approach in the sense that what we do, and again, we're leveraging PLG to the maximum here, right? Like we have 35,000 customers. There's a lot of large customers in there. The key is to identify who they are, what use cases you have, and then to proactively engage with them. And so the way we scale the business is by constantly monitoring what's out there, and to grow our sales teams and our customer success teams, our SDR teams, in accordance with that growth, right, that we see in the PLG motion, and I would say the upside potential that we have identified in these customers. So in that sense, we're looking at it in a fairly scientific way. We today primarily focus on that self-serve customer base as the customers we go after. So we don't really proactively go after greenfield accounts where we don't have any presence, other than in certain verticals where we feel that customers should have our product to really be successful, like gaming and other verticals of that nature. But that's the way we scale the business, is to really look at what are the signals we're seeing, and then obviously, this is still a fairly, I would say, early stage sales organization in some ways. So there's still a lot of things to learn around like the parameters that drive the business. But we try to look at those, and we try to scale our sales organization as the kind of self-serve PLG motion grows, and as we identify the prospects to go after in that motion.
So that's scaling from the inside. What about companies that are scaling through, say, a merger or an acquisition? How should a revops or sales leader manage that process on their end?
Yeah, so we've done one acquisition here, but at Atlassian I did 4 larger ones and 2, 3, maybe 4 smaller ones. And I think it comes down to articulating upfront what the core principles are that you want to stick to, right? What you see in acquisitions, that is, people are in some ways not clear on how they want to integrate the business and what the core principles are that they want to stick to, and where they want to, in essence, absorb some of the new capabilities from the acquired company as new traits or things that they want to adopt within the company. And I think that's the key thing. So, for example, at Atlassian, one of the things we did is we had a transparent pricing mechanism. So all of our customers could see all of our pricing on the website. None of the customers some of the companies that we acquired had transparent pricing. And so the first thing we would do is, in essence, take their pricing model, figure out what the right level of pricing was, and then we put it out there transparently on our website within 4 to 6 weeks after we acquired them. And that was non-negotiable, right? And so Similarly, we had a stance on negotiations that was pretty strict, where we wouldn't negotiate any of our deal terms with customers. And we did the same thing. So we put every company on transparent terms that were available to everybody and that were the standard Atlassian terms. And that was one thing that we didn't want to negotiate. And so the benefit of that is, like, when a company comes in, that within 6 weeks, they will be on a new pricing scheme, will be available to the customer. The ways that we communicate with customers were established, etc. So that was a big thing, and that accelerates kind of the integration. I would say the second thing then is, like, on the things that you want to adopt from the acquired company as part of the integration. Obviously, you need to make sure that these things get communicated within the company. Generally, at least in my experience, most of the companies we acquired were smaller than the host company, right? And so obviously, if you want to take something that you see in an acquired company and you want to make that a standard practice in a larger company, there's a number of things you need to do in terms of training, enablement, communications, etc., that you want to really make sure that you embed, right? And then finally, I would say, treat those employees as if they've been your employees forever, right? And there's a tendency with acquisitions to kind of, in some ways, downscale the jobs that people have, right? Especially if it's a much smaller company that you acquire. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, sometimes that's not. And there's talent there that you want to integrate into your overall talent pool now more than ever, and that you just want to treat as if these people have been around for 4 or 5 years, like they have been generally, right? They've worked for their companies 4 or 5 years. They don't start from scratch when you acquire them. And so we've seen huge success with integrating people well and giving them much bigger career opportunities in the parent company, right, or in the host company.
Just very quickly on that, for leaders who might have some sort of concern around never negotiating with clients, have you seen that affects churn rates or conversion rates at all?
Not really, but I think it depends a little bit on the company, right? So at Atlassian, that was the stance, and people got used to it over the 16, 17 years of existence. And so when you acquire somebody, it became, okay, well, we understand the parent company has done this forever. And so I don't think you can necessarily do that easily everywhere, right? And so it is a matter of, like, I would say 2 things. One, educating the sales team on the benefits, not just for them, but for the customer of some of these aspects, right? I mean, ultimately, I am a core believer in the fact that most customers want to make sure that they get treated as well as their competitors or other companies in the space that buy the same thing, right? And I think that's more important than the actual price level at which they buy, right? And so the negotiations around discounting and terms, etc., are generally all oriented towards, like, am I getting a decent deal? And transparency solves for that, because they know that they get the same thing as everybody else. And if you stick to that, I think it actually increases trust for the customer. They just know that they get the same deal as their neighbor. And I think that's also something that builds trust. And for the salespeople, it accelerates the sales cycle in some ways, because you don't have to go through that long, protracted process of explaining or negotiating or setting higher prices than you need to, and then discounting them to get to a level where you want to land, right? So there's just a lot of kind of mechanics that are redundant in that overall process that become much more simple when you adopt some of these transparent pricing or no negotiation stances.
And if raising venture capital is the goal, how should RevOps leaders think about their function? What kind of changes should they make?
For investors, it's all about predictability, right? And so it comes down to getting a good handle on what, again, setting expectations, right? Like, what can you deliver, and then delivering against that. And if you do that, then that becomes a much more, obviously, you want to show the right level of growth, because ultimately that's what everybody pays for these days. But being predictable about it and delivering against it, I think, is the main thing that people want to see.
Let's switch tacks a little bit and talk about your career. So across all your sales roles so far, what do you find yourself doing more and more as your career progresses?
Yeah, I would say communications is becoming a bigger piece of this. right? And obviously now I'm back at the smaller company, but the bigger the company gets, the more time you have to spend in making sure that the things that are being decided are communicated properly and propagated within the enterprise, and that everybody has a chance to hear that message multiple times, because it does take time and patience to get it across.
How have sales and revops changed over the past, let's say, 10 years? Where's the industry headed next, in your opinion?
It boils down to that I would say the only successful salespeople are those that can truly impact their customers' business, right? So having the ability to really understand what your customer is facing more and more, and that's in conjunction with product and marketing, to have an opinion about how their business needs to be run, right? And obviously, ideally, your product addresses that, because otherwise you're not going to sell anything. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to, right? People want to buy your product because they will be better off after they do so. And so that ability to really understand what's going on, articulate that in a proper fashion, and convince the customer is what a modern salesperson needs to be able to do. So the kind of used sales car people are pretty much going extinct if they are not already, right?
Definitely on the way out. And for the ambitious sales managers out there, what's one secret to surviving and thriving the C-suite that they should probably know about right now?
I mean, I don't know if it's a secret, but I would say the most important thing is to hire the right people, right? Like, so I would say spend a disproportionate amount of time on making sure that you bring on the right talent, that you avoid as many mistakes as possible, because these mistakes are generally costly, and to groom that talent so that in essence they can do your job, so you can move on to the next one, right? That's kind of what it boils down to eventually. So hiring, identifying, hiring, grooming the right talent, and not making hiring mistakes, I would say, is what I would consider the most important thing at this point.
And to avoid those mistakes, when you are hiring, what are you looking for the most in a candidate?
I don't know if you can avoid the mistakes entirely, right? It's a constant game of attempting to get better at it. That's essentially what I try to do. When it comes down to salespeople and sales teams, ultimately, I think curiosity and perseverance are like the two key things that you need to look for in a salesperson. Curiosity, because I think that's the only way that you can truly have the empathy for a customer that you need to have to get a sense for where they're at and what they need to accomplish and how you can help them with that. And then obviously, perseverance is pretty obvious. Like you have to keep at it and keep trying in a polite and diplomatic way, so you gain traction, right? But it's definitely a difficult job, and so you have to be able to persevere.
And what about the opposite? What would ruin their chances with you?
I think a level of arrogance or inability to listen to what people are saying, kind of the opposite. I mean, not the opposite of curiosity necessarily, but that's the key thing, right? So it's kind of finding that balance between, obviously, if you try to convince somebody to buy something, or to teach them something about their business, there has to be some level of confidence. But you want to make sure that that doesn't turn into arrogance, that doesn't kind of yield anything in the end.
And if you could deliver, based on your experience in sales, if you could deliver one piece of sales advice on a billboard, what would that be?
Listen to the signals that your customer is giving you, right? It all comes down to really making sure. So maybe it's listen exclamation point. I'm not sure, but really kind of try to understand where a customer is at. That doesn't mean like interrogations, but like, based on an interview, on a point of view you have about the industry that you develop over time, combined with the ability to adapt that to a customer's specific environment. I think that's the key to set you up for success moving forward with that customer.
And it all comes back, I think, to that point about empathy that you mentioned earlier on. It's impossible for you to listen to your customer if you're not doing it from an empathic or an empathetic position. If it's rather from a position of I need to sell you something rather than I'm trying to understand what your problems are and how I can potentially help.
And you know, ideally having some level of point of view on that problem already, because that's what gets you. That's ultimately what gets you in the door initially, right? Is that there's a belief that the customer will learn something from you.
Not talking shop for a little bit. What's something super quirky about you that most people don't know?
I don't know if it's quirky, but I used to travel a lot, and I'm, you know, more on the adventurous side. So in a sense, I'm not the beach type. I'm not the guy who likes to sit in luxury hotels. I'm the one who, you know, when I have a chance, I would prefer to be like on a bus in a very remote place and really discover the country. And that's, yeah, what I've done for a long time. I have had to kind of put that on pause for a while now, but at some point I'd love to go back to that and kind of spend more time, you know, discovering the world again. And if you put a camera in my hands at that point, then and I'm even happier.
What was your most memorable trip?
There's been a few. And you know, it's always hard for me to pick, you know, the country I like the most, but there's a lot of countries I've had really incredible experiences in. Mali was one, very hard to go to these days, but that was a very memorable experience. Indonesia is a place I like. I have loved traveling through China, also hard to do these days with COVID, but yeah, way back when I traveled quite a bit through China. I used to live in Hong Kong actually, and so it was pretty close, and I had an ability to go out there fairly frequently. But yeah, lots of places that I love, really.
So it sounds like Asian countries mostly.
No, I would say I've been to Latin America. Probably, you know, Africa is still the most undiscovered continent for me. So, I mean, other than a few countries, I haven't really kind of canvassed it like I have Asia or South America. But yeah.
How many countries would you count total that you've traveled to in your lifetime?
About 80.
Man, that is ridiculously good. Okay. And then do you want to add to that? Maybe get to like 100 and then call it.
Yeah, you know, I used to have a KPI actually where I said I need to like visit 2 new countries a year. I haven't been able to do that in the last 15 years, I would say, but for a long time I was on track, and yeah, that's what I'm hoping to go back to.
You're such a CRO, Chris. Having a KPI for the number of countries you want to visit.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things. It's more like if you think about how many there are, and if you want to get through, yeah, most of it.
You need to have some sort of a metric. And if you weren't working in revops, what would you be doing instead?
I would probably be an architect.
Okay. What style?
Oh, definitely contemporary. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. You're actually the second sales leader who said that in this interview series. The first one was Francoise Brocker, the former CEO of Pinterest, and she mentioned architecture as well. She loved houses that are rustic on the outside and modern on the inside. That was her description. So it's interesting to see. I'm now thinking here, wondering whether there's some sort of a correlation between people who like to build stuff and people who end up building sales teams at large enterprise companies. You'd kind of need the same mindset, would you say?
I'm not sure. I mean, there is an element of building, but there is an element of like just aesthetics that pleases me, and that's kind of what I would be looking for more than anything. Is just kind of in some ways a counterbalance to what I do day to day, which is a lot more you know, I would say numbers driven, and you know, obviously there's an element of selling that's kind of more art than science. But that's pretty much what I would be looking for, is the ability to kind of, you know, look at a piece of land and figure out how you can build something that's fully integrated with it, and that's kind of aesthetically pleasing at the end of the day. That really is more the driver for me than the actual building of the house.
Thank you so much, Chris, for making time to talk to us today. I've been speaking to Chris de Vylder, the Chief Revenue Officer of Sentry.io. Chris, we'll catch you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mo. It's great talking to you.